Shalom, Reb Shlomo. Hello. Hello. Almost ready? Okay, there we go. Ah, Baruch Hashem. Shalom, Reb Shlomo. Hello, can you hear me? No, it's yours. Check your. I'm fine. No, can't hear me? No, I'm unmuted. Sounds good. Can't hear me yet? Check yours. Check your setting. Okay, any better? No, still not. All right, let me try checking it. Starting all over again. Okay, is that any better? Still not? Oh, let's leave the meeting and start all over again. Okay, how's that? Still not? No. I'm unmuted. Okay, how's that? No, still not? I don't know. Let's start the meeting all over again. Okay, how's that? Nothing? Still not? Leave the meeting.
I hear now.
Ah, Baruch Hashem. Okay.
I signed out and signed back in. Maybe it was on my side. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Listen, we're all subject to the craziness of the internet. Oh, the Yetzer Hara kid, the Baldova keeps on trying to...
Yeah.
Okay, so far it's only the two of us.
Okay.
So I was looking at Siman Tofresh Chavav. Yeah, so this is the standard stuff we'll look at every year, and okay, I got to get up there and cut down those branches, but we don't pay much attention to it. It's not one of these big issues that permeate. Other than we walk out, we take a look. Okay, do I got a couple of branches? But the halacha, but behind it, I found such fascinating depth. I've seen it. I remember seeing it a couple of years ago. We looked at Tovrek a couple of years ago, but I looked at it now, just preparing for the share, just like, oh my goodness. Okay, let's just learn Shulchan Aruch first, and then we'll go into. Aleph. You shouldn't make a sukkah in the house or underneath a underneath a tree. And if you make a sukkah under the tree, if the shade of the tree is too strong, is the majority of the area, so then it's possible. Even if the sukkah by itself has enough shade without the tree. But if the shade from the tree still leaves a majority of sun shining through, and then if the sukkah has its own sail, its own shade, then it's kosher. Even if you'd left the branches up on the tree, since the amount of shade that the tree gave is not mumah, so therefore the sukkah is kosher, and you don't have to do anything else. You don't even have to cut down the branch. But if the only way that there's enough shade is with the shade of the tree, then you have to bend the branches down until they become bottled together, mixed with the schach, so that you can't recognize the branches from the rest of the schach. So then the schach is mevatel, the roivim schach is mevatel, the branches of the tree. Those say that even if the sukkah is a kosher sukkah that has its own shade, and the shade of the tree is still by itself, would still be a lot of sun coming through. Right? If they literally this schach puzzle is right on top of the kosher schach, bein she'ilan kaidem bein shasukah. It doesn't make a difference which came first. Kivin she'an ve'ilan mechuban neged schach kosher. Doesn't make a difference because the branches of the schach are never of the schach puzzle never becomes bottle. Rama. But if you ultimately bent down that schach puzzle together with the schach kosher, if you don't recognize that they're there, so then a bottle of a sukkah ksher, and that's the Russian run. So because as long as you can't tell that there's schach puzzle there, and still the schach, the majority of the schach is kosher, so then there's kosher. Same thing if you had first, there was schach puzzle from the tree, and you put schach kosher on top of it, make your eruv, that's still called a good bittul. Even though I think the point is that normally you can't be mavatul isser that way. And as if the isser is before, you can't be mavatul isser by mixing in kosher. But by schach you can. Avalim Anov, the basis continues. Avalim Anovim Kineged Avish Schach Kosher. But if the branches of the Schach Posel are in the open spaces in between the Schach Kosher, or Schach Harbe, or that you had a lot of Schach Kosher Schach Shafina, not Neged Nisha Kishir, and even if you took away the tree, there would still be plenty of Kosher Schach. Ksher, it's still kosher, but Hoyel B'Tzel Kosher Merubim Chamsa. Because ultimately the schach of the kosher of the sukkah is kosher. It's the majority of the shade, so that was kosher. Because even if you took away the tree, you still have enough kosher schach to make the sukkah kosher.
Is this case, Rebbe, this last case is talking where the branches are very distant, high away from the schach?
Doesn't make a difference. No. He's just saying if. There's difference. The difference is if you put schach on top of schach or schach on top of shade, on top of open space. So here we say the first case was when you put schach on top of the schach. There you have a problem because it doesn't really become bottle. Some say, the Beishev says it doesn't become bottle. The Rama says it does. However, if you have schach kosher, but you have space in between, and you put schach posel in between. So then, according to the Rama, it's always kosher because you had schach kosher without schach posel. That's the difference between these two opinions, these two cases. It doesn't make a difference which one came first, the kosher schach, the not kosher schach. The schach posel doesn't make a difference when it come first, even though in terms of every other bittul it would make a difference. Okay, that's the basic halacha, and then this halacha basis go quickly. If you then cut off the branches of the ilan of the tree, lachshir, now it becomes kosher. It can become kosher schach. And now the branches now become part of this schach. It's kosher. But you still have to move it around instead of just cutting off and it drops. You have to lift up each branch by itself and put it back down. You have to take each branch, lift it up, put it down. If not, it's possible because you have to make the schach. You can't just, if it fell down by itself, that doesn't make it kosher. Hago, the Rama adds, you're allowed to put the sukkah into a structure that's mechuber to the ground, or even inside the house. You're allowed to take the entire sukkah and lift it up and move it as is outside. Because the schach, the psul is not the schach. The psul is it's inside a building. But if you picked up the whole sukkah as is and moved it outside, that's not called using schach that was possible. And the gimel ha'is sukkah lamata bebayis tachas gag. If you built the sukkah into that, it's in the house, and you took the beams that are separating that cover the roof, you take the roof off of the house. Even though the slats that was holding up the cement, what do you call it, the board that was holding up the roof, it's gone. So even though those boards are there, it still could be a kosher sukkah. Hagon the Rama adds, therefore you're allowed to make a sukkah underneath what we call a shlak, a roof that moves. Lisgar, and you're allowed to open and close it. Umutter, the sukkah, therefore you're allowed to close it because of the rain. The lachza for the pascha, and you're allowed to then open it up afterwards. Afilu b'yantiv, sure the sukkah and the pascha, and even on yantiv you're allowed to move around the shlak. Im yesh lahem tzirim shesoiger u'peisech behem ein b'zeh mishalim shum stir behem binyan. This, even if it has hooks and catches to hold it down, that's not called binyan and steer on yantiv. And it doesn't pass the schach as being become posel schach and now becomes kosher schach, so it's not a problem. Still not a problem. But you shouldn't sit underneath the shnak when it's closed. Shows the sukkah because sof goes off at that point. The sukkah is posel. Okay, so this is the general halachas, and we're pretty much familiar with the normal practice of it. So here's what the Tuberekis adds to this. He says, when we talk about an Elon, we're talking about the Eitz Hadas Tov. Because that's the most famous Elon we got in the Torah. And because of the Elon, the Eitz Hadas Tov, it therefore brought it around to this world. And if you're relying upon that tree, of that, the Eitz Hadas Tov, it will passel the sukkah. However, Avram Avinu came and he gave Ishanu Tachas Eitz. Avram Avinu came and was masakin the Chet Eitz Hadas. He made his own tree. He made a tree with which he could be Mekayim Achos Zochim. He could Mekayim a mitzvah with which the tree became part of the mitzvah itself. So therefore, if you have a sukkah that represents Avram Avinu, which is a sukkah which is kosher, and that the purpose of the sukkah is to be masakin the ra. He says as long as there's the rotzen of the person who's being Messiah, who wants to be masakin, the chet of Eitz Hadas is majority of his mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim are enough to put him back into the gather of Avram Avinu. So then, even though there's a schar, there's still part of the Eitz Hadas, which he calls it the midas rois, which are the things with which we're left in our world and which we haven't been masakin yet. We have midas rois. He says so. It's even though there's a but as long as the majority of our mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim put us into the category of Avram Avinu, so then even the miyut of the Eitz Hadas, the midas rois that are left within us, still kosher. So he says, so what happens if a person has midas rois? Because there's still our chelik of the Eitz Hadas Tevra is still within our, this imprint is still within our actions. But you mashpil, you bend them down so that they mix together with the mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim that you have, and you can't then see the difference because it's all becomes part of one person's closeness, mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim, and the mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim are the majority of the person, so still kosher. That still makes it kosher. He says, and you don't have to cut it down. You just have to mix it. It's there, it's true. It's still there. It's still part of the Elon. It's still part of the Eitz Hadas type of Ra. There's still the Ra that's within it, but nevertheless, our majority, the majority of what covers us is our mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim. It still keeps it kosher. He says, so really when we talk about Elon, there's three different types of trees. There's the trees which is Tam of Eitz Superior and Shaman, where where the tree is a beautiful tree and its fruit tastes good and it gives off a great amount of enjoyment. There's the trees which everything everything is bitter, and then there's stam trees that are, that if you mix them together with other fruits, even if the fruit itself is not such good tasting, still that tree can be made to taste good. So he said, so the moment that you talk about a tree which is, as you call it, Eitz Ra, a tree which its fruit are bitter, and therefore it gives off a bad taste and a bad smell. So he says that type of tree, because he says according to one day in the Beis Yosef in the Mechaber, says it doesn't make a difference. You can't allow that to be there. If you allow that to be there, it will ruin all of the rest of the schach, even if it's still some rubim chamsa. So therefore, he says that one has to make sure when they're talking about the tikkun of the sukkah, which comes to us after Yom Kippur. We're mechaper for the chet ego, and therefore, in a sense, Yom Kippur is a tikkun for the chet of Eitz Hadas Tevra, because the Eitz Hadas Tevra, because the flaw, the chesron that took place by the Egel Azov was the Klal Yisrael became, until then the Apostle was a Muslim. We were now Lamaila, we had been Masakin the Kabbalah Sator, the Chait of Eitz Hadas, and once we did the Egel Azov, we now have the Tam of Eitz Hadas again that causes us death. He says, so therefore, he says a person should make sure that that has to be very careful with the mitzvah to make sure that if you have the same mitzvah, same averis that are the gram of the Eitz Hadas, and it's laying literally on top of the mitzvah Samaisim Teva of our actions, even if it's Chamsa, which are kosher, but if it's literally one on top of the other, so then the schach puzzle, the Eitz Hadas, the Ra that's within us, is resting mamish on top of the kosher mitzvah. It will could puzzle the sukkah. He says, however, if it's only that there is empty spots, there's a place where the chama comes through. In other words, he says there's sel tov and sel ra, right? There's sel movas, gam kierch sel movas. So there's a sel movas, there's sel that is ra, and there's also halon b'tzeis shel kibutzel shakai. There's a sel which is also good, right? In Torah, there's a sel tov and a sel ra. He says also chama tov and a chama ra, right? There's a chama that the Rebbeinu Shalom sent out to stop Avraham Avinu from having achnos sarchim, and then Hashem and there's also the chama which Hashem sent to be merapa Avraham Avinu from the tsar of the bris. So he says, so you have both. You have the sale which can be ra and sale that can be good, and you have chama that can be good and chama that can be ra as well. So he says, therefore, when we're talking about measuring, is the schach enough to cover the sukkah? We have tzilsim chamsa. We're talking about when our mitzvahs, ma'asim tovim, are the good sale. That we are, as the pasuk said, Hashem tzilcha yad yaminecha. Right? There's the sale which is the yad Hashem, and if the sale is enough to stop the chama that is harsh, that comes to cause us, overwhelms us with not being able to see the tov from the ra. So therefore, the tzel tov, right? Hashem that tzel allows us to even if the chama is coming through it, even if the sun is coming through it, and the sun would by itself would make too much light, causes us not to be able to differentiate between tov and ra. By the way, this just sort of triggered another thought. I saw on the Kavanas, it says on the bracha of Asher Yotzar, which is one of the interesting brachas we take for granted because we say it so often. It says Asher Yotzar Sa'adam b'chachma. Hashem created the Hashem made it possible for us to have the benefit of our neshama, the benefit of Chachmas Hashem, by making limitations on how much light of Hashem we get at one time. If Hashem opens up we call it the tsunoris, the conduits with which the shefa comes, and it's too much, it passes. It makes it not possible for us to be able to have bechira, and not having bechira, even if it's because Hashem gives us too much light, too much chachma. It says, but it takes away our bechira, and our tachlis over here is to have bechira. Or Hashem blocks the light. There's no way for us to stand before Kodesh Baruch Hu. So then we understand why the bracha says, The plan that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us to be able to serve Hashem, that's called Kisei HaKavod. The Kisei HaKavod is the world in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, a world in which to have Bechira. And therefore, if there's too much light, too much Chachma, too much of the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or too little of the light, just there's somewhat of a comparison between that and the tzeil and the chama of the sukkah. So he says, so one of the kavanas, one of the insights to come out of this is when we look at our world and we see tzaddik v'raloi. Tzaddik v'raloi is the famous question, like how do we understand tzaddik v'raloi? So he says, so the sukkah itself becomes the makom hashras hashchina, and there is definitely the tzeil, which is tov. There's also the chama. There's also the heat that comes through. So he says, you can, as long as you have the majority of tzeil, so it's tzaddik v'raloi. There's a little bit of ra. We can tolerate tzaddik v'raloi. It has a purpose. And purpose tzaddik v'raloi may not be for the tzaddik himself. In other words, it's the shade for which the shadow for which the tzaddik is able to impress upon his world around him. And therefore, the tzaddik himself is kosher, even though some of the ra is still left in his world. And sometimes for the tzaddik to be masakin, sometimes it's for other people to be masakin. But the purpose is that the tzaddik should show where the chama is. You have to know how to deal with that which we see in our world that seems to opposite of the protection of the tzeil hasukah. She says, so we're going back to the very premise that this sukkah is the tikkun for the chet of Adam, tikkun of Adam Eitz Hadas. She says, and we know that tzaddik v'raloi is because of that chet. Because we know there were tzaddikim, Yisha, etc., right? That there were tzaddikim, gemurim nistalkum b'nei iter shel nachash, because the eitz of the nachash were gone in the way. Therefore they would have to die. So it has to do with the tzaddik himself. The tzaddik himself would be ready to live chayin nitzchi. But there's still that little bit of the ra that's in our world, which is still left over from the chet eitz hadas. And sometimes it's up to the person that could be masakin it. Otherwise, there is a larger part of the world which has not yet does not have this takana. So therefore, we still see the tzaddik v'raloi. The tzaddik still has ra that he still has not completed, either him or to get other people to complete it. And the reason and the very essence of why that the tzaddik v'raloi is because of the chet of Adam Mechaba. We do have a body which originally should have been able to have chayin nitzchi. Even our gashmius, our body, should have been at a higher madrega, and therefore, the very fact that we struggle with as we call it, guf acher, we deal with a physical body which gets in the way of our closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, we still struggle with tzaddik v'raloi. We still suffer with the question of the tzeil being a tzeil move mechamsa, because if we let the ra too much in there, when you have ra v'raloi, it's too much. The ability to be able to differentiate is no longer there, and that therefore would lead us back to the flaw of Eitz Hadas, because that's what the Nachash wanted to tempt Chava with, to tempt Adam with. Is I want to show you this great chama that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is hiding from you. Right? The Rebbeinu Shalom is hiding from you the good that he really wants you to have. Now, that's the cham of that's the heat of the Yetzer Hara, which in itself puzzles us. Therefore, the schach of the sukkah, which is the tikkun for chet of Adam Chava, is there to make sure it's still some room machamsa. But as long as it's still some room machamsa, as long as there's more shade, which is the entire mitzvah of a person's life, even if you didn't lower and you had a kosher sukkah, and even if you didn't lower the branches, but since the branches themselves don't take away from the essence of the type that has been part of the tikkun of the sukkah, so it still could be kosher. And if you mashpil them and ma'arav them, or you cut them off, which is the person saying, I'm cutting off all of that which is posel, schach posel, and I'm let it fall amongst the rest of my mitzvahs and mashim tovim. I'm disconnecting it from the eitz hadas tevara, but I still have to make sure that I can't I have to do something with it. I can't just let it be there. You have to lift it up. You have to still shake it a little bit in order that the asiya, that what we do with our world, even with the things that we have already disconnected from its shorish of ra, but you have to take an action. You have to do something with it. You can't just let it sit there. You have to be lifted up. Otherwise, it's tas of limit also. Says, and therefore, we ultimately comes into the metaphor of the bias, which we'll have to lay for tomorrow. But that's the building a sukkah in the middle of our house, and with which we then start opening up the rafters in order so that we have a kosher sukkah. That's a lesson all itself on how to make sure that our homes are mukim kosher, and mukim that can be kosher for a sukkah. Tomorrow we'll continue a little bit more, and we will be zeicher to be able to have a sukkah which is kosher and will protect us from the koyach around the world. All right.
Koyach Rebbe.
Metaphor is an amazing metaphor.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. We'll talk tomorrow, B'ez Hashem.
Have a wonderful day, Rebbe. Thank you.